Thanks for joining us this week in our session. I'm pleased to be joined again by Natalia Arzeno-Gonzalez, our Chief Data Scientist here at Infinx. And this week, we're going to talk about NLP and coding and how it can benefit practices and ultimately lead to better reimbursement. So welcome back, Natalia. Happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in. I think a lot of these technology terms can be a little confusing, and there's a lot of terms being thrown around a lot lately. So I thought we would get started and just get an understanding of what NLP is.
Yeah, so NLP is just stating what each letter stands for. It stands for natural language processing, and it falls under the AI umbrella. So it draws on techniques from linguistics and from computer science. Some people consider it a subfield of computer science. And what it aims to do is understand and extract information from text. So instead of having some numerical data that we're analyzing, we're looking at just words, sentences, paragraphs, and then trying to make sense of it or extract some key details from it. So there are many applications that require NLP in order to achieve their objectives, their goals. And NLP is just present in our everyday life. So some examples in just everyday applications would be autocomplete in text, email response suggestions, search engine results, autofill forms, language translation. All of these require NLP in order to achieve their goal, right? So they're taking text in and then giving something out. And there's a lot you can do with it.
Great. What are you seeing right now in terms of coding challenges in the healthcare space?
Yeah, so when we think about coding and specifically challenges, then we have to look at challenges for the providers as well as challenges for the coders. And some of these do overlap. So on the provider side, providers are affected, especially more recently, by staffing shortages and just lack of skilled coders. So even though some staff that work on revenue cycle management may be able to take on different roles, in order to do coding, you require specific clinical knowledge and oftentimes certification. So you really need to look for skilled coders in order to perform that job. Now, additionally, you have to deal with the billing rules and guidelines. Now, these are complex and diverse, and they change by pay. So even though many providers might choose to use the Medicare rules as a generalized set that serves as a baseline, then they will still encounter denials for commercial payers because of just payer nuances and the specifics on the particular codes and payer guidelines. Now, these guidelines are also updated periodically. So providers need to make sure that they're up to date with the billing guidelines, and codes can also change. So codes can either become unbillable or perhaps new codes are being introduced. So in the past few years, we've had COVID-19. There is now an ICD-10 code for COVID-19. And guidelines have been updated accordingly. Now, it's not just specific codes, but ICD-10 codes are the standard at the moment for coding diagnoses. However, in January of this year, ICD-11 came into effect as well. So even though it's not widely used, we will be seeing some code changes coming up as well. Now, we've talked about challenges with the staffing as well as the guidelines and codes, but then also we have what is being coded, and that is the actual documentation. A lot of times that might be incomplete or missing, where they would need certain details in order to satisfy the coding requirements, and that might not be readily available. Now, some of these challenges, the improper documentation, changes in guidelines, these will also affect the coders. But coders have additional challenges as well. So they're actually reading through the encounter notes, through the patient charts, and these can be quite lengthy. So they can be a page, 10 pages, or 100 pages. So they need to be able to read through all of them and then search for the codes, or and it's not the codes, search for the evidence that leads to the codes. And they need to be able to identify this evidence, and then not just identify like this is a diagnosis, but also know that this diagnosis is a billable code for this payer guideline. So they need to find the right guideline and then ensure that they're meeting all of the requirements for that as well. And as coding rules change, then coders need to be able to keep up with those standards as well. So challenges in a lot of different spaces.
Are there ways that NLP can help resolve some of those challenges?
Oh, definitely. So NLP can be used at a high level to try to mimic the tasks that coders are performing. And this can be used to help them in a sense. So NLP can search through the clinical notes and highlight the relevant information. So now, whereas a person might take a long time to go through, again, like tens of pages or 100 pages, the computer can do it quite quickly. And so with NLP, you can identify the relevant clinical concepts as well as the billable codes. And then this could be either implemented as an aid to coders or as a completely automated process. And so the end goal of NLP would be to find the codes to mimic the coder's job. Now, there are many ways to reach that goal. And depending on what you're doing, then you can reach that goal with different levels of success. So in a very basic way, you can think of just like a keyword search. So we're going to look for any word that matches an ICD description. However, that doesn't really work with healthcare, because in healthcare, there are many ways to state symptoms or diseases. Different clinicians might write their notes differently, but mean the same thing. We're also dealing with many abbreviations that can have multiple meanings and be tied to different codes. So some keyword searches would not be helpful. And so the way that NLP helps would be thinking of clinical concepts. So NLP aids in identifying these concepts. Now, what I mean by concepts is you can think of at a high level, just all of the synonyms that mean the same thing. It goes beyond that because it actually tries to understand the context in the sentence. But as an example, say you have the words in different charts, you may have neck pain, cervicalgia, neck ache, painful neck. All of these are linked to a clinical concept of neck pain. Now we understand that it's the same diagnosis. Now, if we look at certain ontologies for clinical concepts, such as the SNOMED CT ontology, the neck pain diagnosis, what we learn is that it's further associated with finding of neck region or pain at some anatomical site. And then this ontology also gives us the details that we have more detailed concepts that are tied to neck pain, such as myofascial neck pain. And beyond that, beyond finding the actual concepts, you can say, well, this concept is mapped to a certain ICD-10 code. So in the case of neck pain, it maps to cervicalgia, which is ICD-54.2. So all this is done with NLP. And a coder would need to have the clinical knowledge, or would have clinical knowledge, to understand that all of these are the same concept as well. But it's a task that does require some clinical expertise. So for coding, NLP helps by identifying these clinical concepts and also linking these concepts to standard ontologies or code sets. So we can use the link codes for lab tests, ICD codes for diagnoses, or CPT codes for procedures. But it's not just identifying the actual codes. We need to understand what codes are actually present in an encounter, and NLP can help with that as well. So are any of the clinical concepts negated? So the note states that there's an absence of something, so no pain, or doesn't experience pain. Are they related to some family history? Is it some sort of suspected diagnosis that's being tested for? All of these can be achieved via NLP methods. So it can actually be quite helpful in the coding space.
how can providers benefit from utilizing NLP for coding?
So when we think about the provider challenges, they have to do a lot with staffing and time. So providers they can leverage NLP solutions in order to increase productivity and also just reduce the manual burden so that providers can focus more on patient care. Now, beyond addressing those challenges, one thing that I hadn't previously mentioned would be denials. So if we have an NLP system that doesn't just find codes, but is also able to understand billing rules and tie it all together, then NLP systems could potentially aid in reducing coding denials as well.
Great. What kind of coding solutions are you starting to see NLP incorporated in terms of technology?
Okay, so NLP or coding solutions can be split up in a few different ways. So we can think of characterizing them by the objectives or features, as well as by the algorithms running in the back end. So I'll start with that latter one. So NLP systems for coding, they can be based on rules. So we have different types of systems. Some of them are based on rules. These are rules generated by domain experts or rules that have been curated throughout the years. It's a very lengthy process to develop such a set of rules. They're highly complex and detailed. NLP systems can also be based on computational NLP, which a lot of the times when we talk about NLP, we do mean computational NLP. So these would be all the NLP techniques based on like math or computer science. Or for optimal results, probably coding solutions would be using both some sort of rules as well as computational NLP. Now, just to address that, coding systems based on NLP still have to address some of the pain points that were affecting providers. They also affect these solutions in a sense that they need to be addressing changing codes. So rule-based systems and computational NLP systems would address these in different ways. So it's something to kind of keep in mind when looking at NLP systems is how they deal with evolving codes and changing guidelines. So now, regardless of what is on the back end, NLP solutions can also be characterized based on how much human intervention they require. So there are autonomous coding solutions, and there are also assisted models. Now, the autonomous models, those would be the ones that are no-touch solutions. So a patient chart or a patient encounter note is provided and codes are output. And there is no assumption that a human will be looking at this other than to audit. However, these types of systems are newer. And so given that in order to just kind of hand something off without a human ever looking at it, you need to have an extremely high level of accuracy. The autonomous solutions usually have very restricted scope. And this is based on the setting. So they may work well for like outpatient in certain kinds of facilities for certain kinds of low complexity procedures. Maybe they'll work well for standard radiology in an outpatient facility, but autonomous coding solutions might not work well for cardiac surgery or some high complexity procedures. Now, there's also assisted solutions. So assisted solutions are meant to just help the human coders, and they can help human coders in different ways. So they can, for example, just highlight the text that's pertaining to clinical concepts and then provide the relevant codes. So we're mimicking what a coder does, but aiding the coder in the process. So it is not doing it automatically without any human input. These solutions may incorporate different modules that are aiding in coding. So they may highlight diseases that are only present. So we're looking at assertion, so whether something is present or negated or absent. Also, these solutions would be looking at whether diseases relate to a patient or a family member, family history, and they can go beyond just highlighting words. So We can look at medications lists, and then maybe some of these solutions would be linking medications to the diseases that they are used to treat. And so they may be pointing to different levels of evidence in the solution. And then based on what it is that you're coding for, so if it's general ICD coding, or if you're specifically looking for like HCC codes, then a lot of these solutions will take care of that as well.
So how can providers get started leveraging this? I think this all sounds great, but I think providers are probably a little leery of how and where do you start?
Yeah, so it's not something really that can be built in-house. So unlike some tech initiatives that can be implemented by internal IT or analytics teams, leveraging computational NLP and coding, it really requires a solution developed by a data science team with experience in NLP and with some domain knowledge in the healthcare space. So that's another thing that in healthcare, generalized NLP models may not work well because they're not trained on healthcare data. So it really needs to be a specialized solution. And so providers would need to search for solutions that meet their specific needs.
Is there anything that they should look for in terms of a coding solution? Any red flags, any specific features or anything?
Mm-hmm. So coding tech solutions can be somewhat varied. So providers would first need to understand what are their current challenges and their objectives in a coding tech solution. And so that's how they would find the best product for them. So they need to, going back to the challenges, try to understand what is the problem that they're trying to address. So is it a staffing shortage, time limitations? Is there an issue with the accuracy that's being from the current coding process? Or is there some other challenge that they're trying to address? And then also, how is this going to be used in that? Is it going to be used as to code new charts, to code new encounters, or is the coding solution going to be used for audit purposes? Now, these are key to understand in order to just make the initial decision of, do we need to find an assisted solution or an autonomous solution? So the assisted solution is the one that aids a human coder, and the autonomous solution is no touch, but quite restricted. So then providers should look into the specific product features. So what kind of coding is being done? Is it ICD-10 coding, HCC codes, DRGs, LOIN codes for lab? Or are they coding something else? And how customizable is the system if you do need a specific type of code? And so this will define some of the requirements for the coding solution. And when looking at the coding solutions, you talked about red flags. It's helpful to know what domains computational NLP coding solutions have been trained on, if they're trained models, and mainly what have they been successfully tested on. So if you're looking at an autonomous coding solution that has 99% accuracy, but that accuracy is in low complexity radiology, and you're looking at oncology charts, that is not going to translate. So you want to make sure, or providers should make sure that what the coding solution that they're looking at either has been proven to be a general coding solution, or that it is specific to their specialty or setting, types of procedures and such. And then finally, once they identify and they understand what kind of features they need in a product, what type of product that would be beneficial to them, providers should set up a proof of concept to understand how the coding solution would perform on their specific patient charts or clinical notes. So this would be an evaluation of like, what is the percentage of autonomously coded charts, or what codes are being reliably identified. Also, what is the level of detail provided by the coding solution? Perhaps providers need somewhat broad codes or very detailed codes. How correct are those codes that are being identified? and more. There's many ways of evaluating a coding solution, but it's important to understand how it performs on that data. And as much as I'd like it to be, AI is not magic. So understanding the performance and the limitations of the product specifically on that provider's data is very important.
Great, thank you. Lots of really, really good info and takeaways for providers. Thank you again for being here, Natalia.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.